The Atlanta Falcons went through a lot of changes, but we're going to tell you why they may be the team the Buccaneers need to worry about the least in 2026.
You are Locked On Buccaneers, your daily Tampa Bay Buccaneers podcast. Part of the Locked On Podcast Network, your team every day.
What's up, and welcome into the Locked On Bucs podcast. I am your host, James Yarcho, and today's episode is brought to you by FanDuel. Right now, new customers can bet just $5 and get $150 in bonus bets if your first bet wins. Head to FanDuel.com to get started. We are going to talk a little bit about Buccaneers third-round pick Ted Hurst coming up in a little bit, but throughout this week, we are going to be bringing you the State of the South series, where we are going to take a look around the NFC South and talk about some of the changes that have been made to the Bucs division rivals. And there is no better place to start than with the Atlanta Falcons. Joined now by the one, the only Aaron Freeman of Locked On Falcons. Excited to have him on. We'll see if I'm this excited for Julian or Ross, but I love chatting with Aaron. We always have a lot of fun. But Aaron, we're going to dive into the State of the South, as I am calling it, go through the rest of the NFC South teams now that the dust has settled a little bit with the offseason changes. The NFL draft is in our rearview mirror. And so I want to kind of introduce Bucs fans to what's been going on within the division. So let's start with the Falcons, and let's start with the changes amongst the coaching staff after Raheem and his crew were let go. Hopefully the Bucs are a beneficiary of one of those layoffs in Zach Robinson. But what is Kevin Stefanski and his staff going to bring to the Falcons that you think they've kind of been missing over the last couple of seasons with the previous regime?
Well, if you ask a lot of Falcon fans, it's a sort of seriousness that has been lacking these last couple of years, with Raheem Morris being much more of a fun-loving, smiling sort of guy. That doesn't personally bother me, but when your team is not winning football games and you seem to be enjoying your job, a lot of people do not necessarily love that, at least from the outside looking in. And sort of Kevin Stefanski rarely smiles. It's a couple of times I've seen it, but that is not certainly something that he seems like he's enjoying doing the job of being an NFL coach. So there's a certain sort of seriousness, again, whether that means anything when it comes to wins and losses, but that is something that I do think you'll see under Kevin Stefanski. And when it comes more to the on-field stuff, you're going to probably see the Falcons get back to running the football, an under-center offense. That's been a big talking point over the last calendar year with Zach Robinson and his departure from Atlanta, with his love for the pistol offense and not running enough under-center stuff. And now you're going to get a coaching staff under Kevin Stefanski that will focus the offense on that, or at least in theory will focus the offense. We'll see if it comes to fruition, because the question is, do you have quarterbacks that can really run that with Tua Tagovailoa and Michael Penix? But more on that, I guess, later. And then you have a lot of continuity when it comes to the defensive coaching staff. Jeff Ulbrich, the Falcons defensive coordinator that Raheem Morris hired last year, did an excellent job sort of turning around that defense, and they want to build upon that continuity heading into this offseason, and hoping that the strength of this Falcons team, despite all the talent that they have on offense, last year was the defense, and they're hoping that that can kind of spearhead their success again this season in 2026.
Yeah, well, and of course, we certainly know that the addition of Stefanski adds a little bit of fun for Bucs fans when it comes to Baker Mayfield and his comments. That was an enjoyable couple of weeks there with the barbs that Baker was sending that way. But you alluded to it a little bit, so let's dive into it with the free agency. Kirk Cousins is out. Tua comes to town on, honestly, an absolutely killer deal for the Falcons if he can regain his form a little bit. But, they added a ton of players in the open market. Brian Robinson comes to town. Zacchaeus is back. Austin Hooper, Cam Thomas, Nick Folk, Javon Taylor. But they did lose Tyler Algier, who a lot of us thought were going to come to Tampa, would have been a perfect fit there with Bucky Irving. But then D. Alford, Mooney, Contavious Street, David Sills. What are some of these changes going to do for Atlanta in terms of what they were lacking? Or did it create some additional problems in some of the guys that they lost?
Yeah, I think when you look at the quality of players that the Falcons lost, players like Caden Ellis to the Saints, much to our chagrin here on this show, I think you can argue that the Falcons lost more than they gained, that they went out and signed, or I think they signed like 21, 22 players in free agency, added a couple of guys via trades as well. So it's like 25 or 26 players added to this roster, not counting their draft class. And not too many of these guys are needle movers in the strictest sense where you go like, oh, that guy is going to be a difference maker. But the Falcons are making a lot of sort of 1 year contract bets, hoping that some of these guys come into the building. Tua being prominent among that. Azeez Ojulari, a former high round pick for the New York Giants. Jahan Dotson signing a 2-year deal. Some of these guys that have not necessarily had the most success or the best careers these last few seasons are kind of looking to be kind of reclamation projects. And I think the Falcons are betting on some of these guys getting opportunities in Atlanta and hoping that they can kind of raise the floor for this football team. But overall, the Falcons didn't really necessarily gain a whole lot when it came to free agency. A lot of these moves, you're just kind of hoping that they tread water. When you're looking for a bounce back season from Tua Tagovailoa, what that looks like is probably a lot like what you got from Kirk Cousins the last couple of seasons. You're just doing it now for a rock bottom price as opposed to the most expensive contract given out to an outside free agent in NFL history. So that's kind of the difference where the Falcons are just kind of hoping in a lot of ways that maybe they're trading water with a lot of these pieces to plug a lot of holes to get them through this season, but they're doing it with bargain bin prices.
Now, you did talk about how the defense kind of came on later in the year, and that was 100% true. They have some absolute ballers on that defense. Obviously, my guy Xavier Watts, who was, should have been, I think, more widely considered in the Pro Bowl conversation, the defensive rookie of the year. He was absolutely outstanding. Jesse Bates is still there. AJ Terrell is still there. I think a lot of fans that are unaware of the situation, we saw James Pierce have an impact, but of course he has his issues going on. What do you kind of see with the James Pierce situation and how it's playing out, how that's going to affect what the Falcons are able to do defensively should he end up dealing with any kind of punishment from the NFL?
Yeah, it's going to be a big challenge for the Falcons to overcome. Last season, they had a lot of sacks. Falcons finished second in the NFL in sack production with 57 sacks. But if you look at particularly the first half of the season, a lot of that sack production came with the Falcons blitzing with a player like Caden Ellis and bringing 5 or more rushers. I think they were, in fact, when you look through like the first 11 or so games of last season, they were dead last in the NFL in terms of sacks generated off of 4-man pressures and whatnot. But then in the second, after about week 11, so in the second half of the season, they were near the top of the league at generating that. And a lot of that came from the 8 sacks that I think James Pierce had over the last 8 games of the season in terms of being able to generate that 4-man pass rush. And so with the expectation that he is going to get suspended due to the off-field incident that occurred earlier this offseason involving him, allegedly stalking his former girlfriend and, involving some vehicular shenanigans, to put it lightly. He's probably going to get a 6-game suspension. And so for those first 6 games, the Falcons probably will not have as strong a 4-man pass rush. So they'll probably have to rely a lot more on sort of the exotic blitzes. How effective that's going to be without Caden Ellis in the mix, we shall see. But I think the Falcons are hoping that some of the free agent pieces like a Samson Ebukam and Azeez Ojulari, some of the linebackers that they drafted, will allow them to be able to scheme up some pressure in those first 6 or so games that James Pierce is out of the lineup. And then the hope is once James Pierce comes off his suspension, probably around week 7 or so, that for the remainder of the season, that the Falcons can get back to, having that 4-man pass rush sort of spearhead this defense.
All right, well, we are going to get into those linebackers and the rest of the Falcons draft and where the Falcons stand among the rest of the division. That is coming up next on today's episode of Locked On Bucs, part of the Locked On Podcast Network, your team every day. You ever hired someone who looked good on paper but wasn't the right fit? You know how important that is. When you want candidates who truly match what you're looking for, trust Indeed sponsored jobs. If you're hiring, Indeed is all you need. Stop struggling to get your job post seen on other sites. Indeed sponsored jobs puts your post at the top of the page and helps you reach the right candidates faster. Indeed Sponsored Jobs helps your listing stand out and reach quality candidates faster, and they boost your post to the people who are the best match for your role. That makes the real difference. Spend more time interviewing candidates who check all of your boxes with less stress, less time, more results using Indeed Sponsored Jobs. Listeners of this show get a $75 sponsored job credit to give your job the premium placement it deserves at Indeed.com/LockedOnNFL. Just go to Indeed.com/LockedOnNFL right now and support the show by saying you heard about Indeed on this podcast. Terms and conditions apply. Hiring, do it the right way with Indeed. Thank you again for making Locked On Bucs your first listen review every single day. And thank you for making Locked On the #1 sports podcast network. Don't forget to check out the Everydayer Club for ad-free episodes, access to a group chat with me and other listeners of the show. Tap the link in the show notes or go to lockedonbucs.supercast.com. Time to get into some draft talk and where the Falcons stand among the rest of the division. All right, Aaron, we get to the draft here, and the Falcons were largely considered to have the worst draft class among the NFC South. And I use that term loosely because I'm one of those people, I feel like you can't accurately judge a draft until a couple of years down the road. So letter grades mean very, very little to me in the grand scheme of things. We have to see how these guys pan out, in the NFL. And I would say that consensus is not a reflection maybe so much of what the Falcons did, but the fact that they didn't have that first round pick and didn't have that big name guy that they could have had it at 13, where the Rams chose Ty Simpson. And thank you for doing that, Los Angeles. They used it last year to get James Pierce, who obviously was a big impact guy. But the Falcons did select Avian Terrell, the brother of AJ, already there in Atlanta. Wide receiver Zachariah Branch out of Georgia. Defensive tackle Ontario Thompson out of Washington, linebacker Harold Perkins from LSU, and offensive lineman Ethan Onianwa. You're going to have to pronounce how it is.
Onianwa.
See, I had it when I was writing it down, and I was like, yeah, I'm going to butcher this 100%, just like I did with the cornerback, Igbinosun. I butchered that poor kid's name 1,000 times. But what do you make of the draft class? Do you feel Atlanta did kind of a good job of addressing those remaining needs following free agency, where you said a lot of these guys are not, they're not big names, they're more reclamation projects?
Yeah, I think, when you kind of set it up, James, where like you kind of have to grade the Falcons on a curve because they did not have the resources and assets that other teams had going into this draft, going into the draft with only 5 picks, not including a first round pick, not including a 5th round pick, as you mentioned, trading that last year for James Pierce. It'll be fascinating to see that in a hypothetical alternate reality where the Falcons didn't trade that draft pick for James Pierce. Would they have taken Ruben Bain at pick 13 instead of James Pierce? So it'll be interesting, in addition to the Ty Simpson conversation, in terms of what the Falcons could have done, particularly with, still concerns about whether or not the Falcons have a franchise quarterback, sort of comparing those 3 players over whether or not James Pierce, Ruben Bain, or Ty Simpson have better careers certainly will, not keep people up at night wondering what could have been should some of those guys succeed and fail in the NFL. But I think for the most part, the Falcons did a decent job. They tried to go into the draft by being aggressive in free agency, signing the 24 players so that they did not go into the draft with any sort of pressing needs. And I think their strategy was, let's just get good players that fit what we want to do. I think they were able to hit a home run in the second round with Avian Terrell, a player that was widely considered to be a first round caliber player. Now, obviously, given all the perceptions about this past draft, is a first rounder this year the same as a first rounder every year? That's a debatable topic, but certainly I think most people agree that Avian Terrell was one of the best 20 to 25 prospects in this draft class. And to be able to get him at 48, I think was a coup, in addition to the whole idea of him joining his older brother. Not to mention, cornerback 2 has been a problem spot for the Falcons for the better part of the last 5 or 6 years since AJ Terrell's arrival. So it's kind of serendipitous that his younger brother, and they'll be playing together on the same team for the first time in their lives just because they're 6 years apart. Avian is the answer to that cornerback issue. Well, wide receiver Zachariah Branch going to add a lot of speed and juice to that offense, probably be a gadget player. We'll see if they can develop him into more than that. And then you look at the day 3 selections. You got 2 linebackers in Harold Perkins in round 6, Kendall Daniels in round 4. I think this is part of you're seeing it around the rest of the NFL where everybody's going after tight ends. So how do you defend that? Go out there and get athletic linebackers. And that's something that the Falcons did with both of those selections. So I think that really kind of colors the Falcons where they just wanted to get better across the defensive side of the ball, able to add some projects, on the line of scrimmage in the late rounds with Ethan Onianwa on the offensive line and Ontario Thompson along the defensive line in the 6th round. So we'll see what those guys can grow into in 2 or 3 years. They're probably not going to be major contributors over these next couple of years, but I think the rest of this group will have opportunities to get on the field at least as part-time role players. Terrell probably will be a week 1 starter. And if the Falcons can walk away with him being a high-end starter and making it look like he's going to live up to that potential first-round billing, and if they can find 2 or more starters from that rest of the group, that's a very solid haul for the Falcons from a draft standpoint, given the limited resources. So I agree with you. It's understandable why people would be put this draft class at the bottom of this division, given what the rest of the division did and taking advantage of their opportunities. But I do think in the long run, if certain picks hit, I do think this Falcons draft class will look pretty good 3 years down the road.
I do want to touch on Zachariah Branch real quick. He is a guy that I did really like heading into this draft class. Is he a guy that you project to kind of be slowly integrated in? And for Bucs fans, to relate this to someone they know, maybe along the lines of Jalen McMillan, where he was kind of slowly brought in, but then by the second half of the season, you really see him starting to get it, to emerge. Do you feel that's kind of the path for Branch there, where he could probably overtake Dotson or Zaccheaus by the midway point?
Yeah, I think there's going to be a great push externally from, people wanting to get Branch on the field, given his dynamic potential and not necessarily really having a proven alternative option at that wide receiver position outside of Drake London for the Falcons. But I don't expect the Falcons to rush him. I do agree with you. I do think probably the plan is start him out as a sort of spot player early in the season, try to get him incorporated in the offense, manufacture some plays for him, whether that be screens and whatnot, some of these gadgety plays. And as he grows into this offense and gets more comfortable in this offense, he can potentially start stealing snaps from guys like Dotson and Zaccheaus, who, at this point in time do have value, but are more role players at this point in time. And I think you're hoping that by year's end, Branch looks like a player that you can't keep off the field because of that dynamic potential. But I don't necessarily expect the Falcons to roll into week 1 with him, as that number 2 wide receiver playing, 50, 60 snaps in that first game. But I think they'll slow play this to a certain extent. But obviously, I think he's going to be a big part of their success moving forward.
All right, well, let's talk about the division now. Carolina wins it last year. The Bucs absolutely implode after their bye week. We can talk about all the reasons, but that would take a full podcast. They did still remain in contention up until the final week of the year. The Saints look like a brand new team over the second half of the season. So where do you think Atlanta measures up against the rest of the division right now, given all of the changes that they've made from the coaching staff, down to the roster?
Well, it's fascinating to me because I think this year, compared to some of the last couple of years, there's a lot less hype on the Falcons going into this season. Each of the last 3 years, they were kind of the favorite pick to be the team to challenge the Bucs for the division. I don't think that's going to be the case this year. And now that the expectations are considerably lower, maybe that means that the Falcons for once will actually exceed expectations as opposed to doing what they've done the last 3 years, with those expectations being that they could push for a playoff spot and win the division, of disappointing those expectations. So I will be fascinated to see if that is the case, because now no one's really checking for the Falcons like that at this point in time. But I do think it's more than fair why people are like, oh, we've been picking the Falcons to be the surprise team to come out of the NFC South for 3 straight years now. They haven't been able to do it. We'll pick them to finish 3rd or 4th in the division. And I'm not going to be that bothered by that, because I just think that's more than fair. It's kind of the boy who cried wolf over and over again. And until the Falcons prove that they can actually live up to people's expectations, I don't think people should be putting that many expectations on them. But I do think, just like any team in this division, and I'm sure, James, as you talk with the other guys in the division, Ross and Julian, each one of them will basically can make a case for why their team can win the division. I think you can make that case for the Atlanta Falcons. I just think people have grown tired and weary of constantly hearing that case at this point in time, and so there aren't necessarily new points, but it's all the same things. They have a load of talent at the skill positions, they have a solid offensive line, and they have an emerging defense. And if they can just get more consistent quarterback play from Tua or Michael Penix, then they got a shot.
All right, well, way too early prediction in the first week of May. If you have to pick a team that you think wins the NFC South this year, and I will not hold you to it, things can change. But as you look at it right now, who do you think should be the favorite to win the South?
Well, because I'm on the Locked On Bucs podcast, I'll pick the Bucs. But just know, James, if I do this with Julian and Ross, I'll pick the other teams on it. I'll just basically, stay two separate heads because you can never keep me down. So I think the Bucs make a ton of sense. They have been the team that has been the more consistent team over the last couple of years. Will they maintain that, given some scrutiny that Todd Bowles is going to be under heading into the season? We'll have to sort of see, but it's really anybody's race. You can just kind of throw all four of these teams in a hat and pick them out of it, and you'll probably be like, yeah, that makes sense, just as easily.
And that's why they play the games. Aaron Freeman of Locked On Falcons, thank you so much, my friend. Appreciate you jumping on. We're talking about Ted Hurst and what he's going to bring to the Buccaneers offense. That is coming up next on today's episode of Locked On Bucs. NBA playoffs are here, where every possession matters, every matchup is magnified, and every game can swing a series. Right now, FanDuel is giving new customers a great way to get in on the action. You can bet just $5 and get $150 in bonus bets if your first bet wins. The app makes it easy to follow the action with player stats, trends, matchups all in one place. And during the playoffs, that extra insight really matters when you're looking at stars, role players, and key moments. Right now, the defending champion Oklahoma City Thunder are the favorites to win the championship at -160, followed by the San Antonio Spurs at +390, the New York Knicks at +950, the Detroit Pistons at +1600, and the Cleveland Cavaliers at +1900. We haven't had a repeat champion in the NBA since the Warriors did it in 2017 and 2018, and we haven't had a defending champion escape the second round since 2019. Could the Thunder be the team to finally break that streak, or will we be crowning a new champion? Head to FanDuel.com to get started. FanDuel, play your game. Wrapping things up here on today's episode of Locked On Bucs. So Jason Licht had a few things to say about rookie wide receiver Ted Hurst last week. So I'm going to give my thoughts on him in just a moment. But this was a player that was exactly what we had talked about on this show over and over and over again, as far as what the Bucs needed if they were going to draft a receiver. You didn't need to go out and draft a replacement for Mike Evans. You still had a deep receiver room as it was, with Chris Godwin, Emeka Egbuka, Jalen McMillan, and Tez Johnson. What you needed to do was draft Evans' size, because that room had none. Well, that's exactly what they went out and did with the 6'4", 210 receiver, but he adds speed that Evans didn't have, a 4.42 40, with some saying that he might have even been able to run faster than that, considering it appeared, maybe he didn't, but it appeared as though he let up a little bit during the 40 at the combine. Now, game speed is different than 40 speed, but Hurst has shown that he has game speed as well and can easily get separation from defenders in order to get some explosive plays. Jason Licht spoke about Hurst and the Bucs' decision to draft him. Quote, he's fast, he's got incredible ball skills, he's very athletic. If he had a lot of opportunities in the portal with NIL to move on to bigger schools, he chose to stay at Georgia State, which I think is a pretty cool feather in his cap to finish it off with his teammates there. I don't like making pro comparisons sometimes because I don't want to put the pressure on him and all of a sudden anoint him a Pro Bowler right away either. but you can kind of connect the dots. You've got a 6'4", super fast, incredible ball skill guy down the field. There have been some great players that have those assets, end quote. All right. No, Jason Licht is not saying that Ted Hurst is going to be Mike Evans. However, he is saying that Hurst has a lot of the same traits that Evans had that Jason and the Buccaneers really liked coming out of Texas A&M, and then obviously throughout the duration of his career. Here's where the difference lies. Evans was the wide receiver 2 as a rookie starting week 1. As soon as he walked in the building, he was the wide receiver 2, opposite of Vincent Jackson. The two of those guys were awesome together. Hurst is your wide receiver 5, most likely, at least to start the season. But I think, and this is where I differ from Evan a little bit. Evan talked about Ted Hurst last week. I think that he's going to get a solid amount of playing time starting in week 1. And here's why. As I mentioned, he provides the size that the Bucs didn't have in the room before the draft. When Mike left, Mike took the size with him. So while your main 3 are still going to be Godwin, Mech, and J-Mac, you still have Tez there. But Tez has kind of a certain skill set that the Bucs are going to utilize, and those skills come into play in certain situations at certain areas of the field. Cam Johnson, he's there. I don't think it's going to take very long before Hurst overtakes him on the depth chart as the, surefire wide receiver 5. But here's the thing about Hurst. He's going to see the field a lot on third downs, in the red zone, and in the 10 zone. That's where his skill set starting out is going to be the most advantageous for the Bucs and their offense. That's not what Tez's skill set is. That's not what Tez is built for. He is the quick burst, the slant, get him the ball in space, yards after catch, deep ball threat. And while Hurst can be that guy, he can be the guy that you just, you tell him to run a go route. You want to hit him with a quick slant because he gets the yards after catch. He's not quite the shifty, quick guy that Tez is, where it's get the ball in his hands in space and he's going to make something happen. But he can blow past these defenders. And so while Hurst can be that guy, starting out, he's going to be more of the move the sticks, box out the defender, back shoulder fade in the end zone kind of player. How many back shoulder fades to the corner of the end zone did the Bucs try last season to players that were not Mike Evans? I don't know the exact number, but the answer is too many. That is what I do know. Sterling Shepard, had a couple of those on more than one occasion. Emeka Egbuka once or twice. That's not their game. That's not what is going to be beneficial to the Buccaneers. Hurst, he's the guy that you can get the ball to with those plays because he's 6'4" with a 37-inch vertical. He's not having that pass broken up by Kool-Aid McKinstry in the back of the end zone. He's coming down with it and scoring a touchdown 9 out of 10 times. I think kind of like what we discussed with Aaron regarding Falcons' new wide receiver, Zachariah Branch. Hurst is going to see the field on occasion in those certain situations early on in the season. Then as things progress, he's going to become more and more involved and not be out there only for certain packages. Zach Robinson is going to be able to use all of these guys, and there are some that you can leave on the field on any down in any situation to do anything that you need. Right now, you also have a couple of guys that you could consider specialists. I think Hurst is in the latter category as a rookie, but I kind of expect, and I'm kind of hoping for a Jalen McMillan style glow up for him as the season progresses. And I think over a little bit of time, if, obviously you don't want to see anybody go down with injury. We dealt with that last season. But if Godwin needs a couple of plays off, if Mech needs a couple of plays off, Jalen has to come off the field. You are going to be able, by the end of the season, to have the confidence to send Hurst out there on the field. He can play the X, the Y, or the Z. You are going to have the confidence in him to fulfill the duties of that receiver and not have to shrink your playbook because he's out there. All I know is if they can freaking stay healthy, I think this offense is every bit as dangerous as last year's. Truly, I do. Year 2 for Emeka Egbuka, I think he is going to be an absolute star in this league. He has all the skills, all of the personality, the attitude, the wow factor. I think he's going to be a star. A la his former teammate Jackson Smith-Njigba. I think he can be that level of receiver. So now you get him in year 2, you expect improvement over last year. Godwin, he came out strong last year, late in the season as he got healthier. So I think he looks a little bit more like himself this season. A full year of McMillan, that is certainly going to help matters quite a bit. Then you add Kenneth Gainwell as an absolute weapon who can do everything that you need out of the backfield. And then you bring Ted Hurst into the fold through the draft. They may not have Mike Evans anymore, but they still have the makings of an offense that, when healthy, can be top 10 in the league, flirting with top 5. That is going to do it for this episode. Please make sure that you are coming back tomorrow. I will be joined by Evan Klosky, as I am each and every week. And then, of course, later on this week, we will continue our focus on the NFC South, the State of the South series, as I will be joined by Ross Jackson to talk about the Saints and Julian Council to talk about the Panthers. In the meantime, check out everything going on Twitter at Locked On Bucs, at @JYarcho_Bucs, Instagram and TikTok at Locked On Bucs in both those places. Subscribe on YouTube, turn those notifications on, as well as wherever you get your podcasts. Join the Everydayer Club. You can click the link in the show notes or go to lockedonbucs.supercast.com. If you want to support the show, but you don't want to join the Everydayer Club, it's really simple. Like this episode on YouTube, leave a 5-star review wherever you get podcasts. It does help other Buccaneers fans find the show. Hope you all have an absolutely outstanding day. Stay safe, stay healthy. May the 4th be with you. Fire the cannons. I want to thank you so much for joining me right here on Locked On Bucs, part of the Locked On Podcast Network, your team every day.